Hello everybody, it's your girl Karen coming yet with a new video for y'all. So welcome into today's video. Today's video is going to be very different and very new to my channel, but I did mention it a couple of videos ago that I'm going to be starting something new on this channel, and that is simply doing makeup and talking about some true crime stories. I honestly have been inspired by Bailey. I'll be linking down her YouTube below. She's amazing. She's really well known, so go check her out. So that being said, this is my first time, so please bear with me. I will be looking down here a lot, and you are currently in the room, so yeah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All right, so for today's video, we're going to be talking about the Lindbergh case. Okay, so the Lindbergh case deals with a toddler who was born on June 22nd, 1930. He was Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. He was 20 months, okay, when he ended up passing away. And he is the son of the famous aviator of Charles Lindbergh Sr. and Anne Moreau Lindbergh. On March 1st, 1932, at approximately 9 p.m., this little toddler over here ended up being taken away from his parents. And basically it is said that his nanny was taking care of him, which was Betty Go, and Betty went to room and ended up finding out that he was not in the crib. So she was panicking, and of course she ended up letting the parents know. They were on a date and they ended up coming like almost an hour later, figuring out that their baby was gone. When this ended up occurring, of course the police were notified, like, hey, my child is missing. I am high-key freaking out right now, and I would like you to do something about it. So there was a ransom note that was found, and in this ransom note it said, hey, if you want Charles Jr. back, you're going to have to pay me $50,000, right? And if you pay me $50,000, then and only then will I return your toddler. So of course, you know, they're like, okay, what do we have to start doing? Like, they're going to be entering into negotiations and all of that jazz. So I want you guys to also know that $50,000 now is equivalent to $923,000. So it's a lot of money, okay? It's a lot of money to just like take a baby. So what they found in the crime scene is that there was no blood. There was no blood whatsoever. And although there wasn't any blood whatsoever, there was traces of mud by the window. But they couldn't really tell like where the footprints came from. So it wasn't like any real evidence they can go by. And there was no fingerprints in the scene either. And the ransom note itself was like scrabble, like it wasn't really like neatly written or anything like that. It's almost like the person like had broken English or something, okay? So there's that, remember that detail. And outside, like right outside, they ended up finding basically the ladder that they utilized to be able to enter the baby's room. And mind you, it was like in the second story. So the ladder basically was like kind of broken. And so it was like, well, how did he end up leaving? You know, there's no traces of blood or anything like that. So with that being said, they ended up having somebody like take the wood and basically try to figure out where did this wood belong to. It's kind of like a fingerprint, you know? And they ended up tracing it back to Brooklyn, New York, but there was like no receipt or anything, so they couldn't trace it back, okay? Remember that. Brooklyn, New York. All right, so like a few days later, they received a ransom note from Brooklyn, New York, and it was stamped from the date March 4th. And then the ransom note was like, hey, I am increasing the ransom. It's going up to $70,000. All right, so it is said that this person ended up using an alias, right? So here is this kidnapper who goes by the name John, and then the representative of Charles Lindbergh and Anne was this school principal, Dr. John Kondo, and he was published in the Bronx Home News and offered to act as go-betweens and pay an additional $1,000 to be able to basically enter into negotiations with the kidnapper. Like, hey, I'm gonna go on the behalf of the Lindberghs and I'm gonna pay extra money because I'm doing this. So please give us the child back. But they both entered into like aliases. So the kidnapper's name was John, and the Dr. John Kondo would go by Jafsie. I'm not really sure if I'm saying it correct, but Jafasi. It's like Jafsie, Jafasi, and that was his code name. And in the third ransom note received by Colonial Lindbergh's attorney on March 8th, informing that an intermediate appointed by the Lindberghs would not be accepted, and requested a note in the newspaper. All right, so they're like, hey, I'm requesting you to put a note in the newspaper. And on March 10th, 1932, Dr. Kondo receives $70,000 in cash as ransom and immediately started to negotiate for payment. But here's the thing. They were not dumb. No, they were not done. They were not dumb. Charles Lindbergh ended up handing over these gold certificates that had a serial number. And the serial number was very, very important because this basically meant that they could trace it back. And since there were these gold certificates and they basically didn't really look like, you know, basically like regular money, like what is this like gold certificate? That's how they were gonna catch the kidnapper eventually. And they gave all this information over to like the banks, you know, like, hey, like if you see anybody within these serial numbers, like, hey, like notify us, right? So here are the police like pretty much waiting for the phone call to come in, but it's not coming in because John isn't using it quite yet. So about 9:30 on March 10th, they received an anonymous phone call, and Dr. Kondo then received a fifth ransom note. It was delivered by a male who was a taxi driver known as Joseph Perrone. I'm not sure how to say his name. So Joseph delivered this saying, hey, this random dude who was actually John ended up giving me this note and he told me to give it to you. So here you go, do what have you with the note, right? And, you know, he was like, I don't know who it was. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he just told me to give it to you. And within this note, he basically said, hey, you're going to find another note and it's going to be in a different location and you're going to go out there and find it. The next note was found underneath a stone at a vacant stand, okay? It was 100 feet from an outlying subway station. The note, which was the sixth note, okay, was found by Kondo as indicated, following the instructions that, hey, that Dr. Kondo has to go at Woodlawn. Okay, he's like, hey, we're gonna enter into negotiations, like this is what you gotta do. So they discussed the payment of the ransom money. Okay, so the stranger agreed to furnish a token of the child's identity, and he ended up giving him a piece of garment of what Charles was wearing that day when he ended up getting kidnapped. And the thing was is that Kondo ended up going with a bodyguard, but the bodyguard wasn't able to basically, like, you know, be in those conversations when he was talking to basically John. Dr. Kondo had to do it alone with John. And during the next few days, Dr. Kondo repeated his advertisements, right? Urging further contact and stating his willingness to pay the ransom. Hey, I have the money, like please just give us a child. You showed us proof, like, okay, I got you. So the suit was delivered to Colonial Lindbergh and later identified, and Kondo continued his advertisements, right? The eighth ransom note was received by Kondo on March 21st. All right, so March 21st, here comes the next ransom note. All right, and it's insisting on complete compliance and advising that the kidnapping had been planned for over a year now. All right, so basically John was like, hey, you gotta put in the newspaper that I've been basically planning to kidnap, you know, the most beloved man at the time like kidnap his baby, they kidnap his kid. And then on March 29th, Betty Go, the Lindbergh nurse, found the infant's thumb guard, okay? She found the thumb guard worn at the time of the kidnapping near the entrance of the estate, okay? So the following day, the 9th ransom note was received by Kondo, threatening to increase the demand of $100,000. So let's do the math of $923,000 plus $923,000. So we're basically looking at almost $2 million, okay? Almost $2 million of, hey, it's gonna go up. And he was refusing a code to use in the newspaper columns. The 10th ransom note received by Dr. Kondo was on April 1st, 1932, instructing him to have the money ready the following night, to which Kondo relied on an ad in the press, right? So he was like, hey, I got you, don't worry, I'm gonna give you the note, but you're gonna have to do as I say, in which Kondo replied to an ad in the press. The 11th ransom note was delivered to Kondo on April 2nd, all right? So then Dr. Kondo ended up receiving an 11th ransom note on April 2nd, and behold, it was then again also delivered by a taxi driver, and he also said that it was an unidentified man. And of course, this note was also saying like, hey, go to this point to go find the next ransom note, which was the 12th ransom note. And it was in front of a greenhouse in the Bronx, New York. And shortly after, on the same evening, by the following instruction contained the 12th note, and Kondo again met was John. He tried to talk to John like, hey, can you please reduce the amount of money that you want to $50,000, because you've been playing games with us, okay? The amount was handed to the stranger in exchange for a receipt, right? He's like, hey, I understand that I just gave you this money, but you're gonna have to write a receipt, okay? You're gonna have to write a receipt explaining that I gave you this money. And he basically told him where Charles Jr. was. And he said, hey, you're gonna find Charles Jr. in a bay near Massachusetts. You're gonna find a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. So, mind you, here was Dr. Kondo going all the way to the Bronx, and now here is John telling them, hey, the child that you are paying all this money for is actually in a whole different state. He's in a boat named Nellie. So of course, what do they end up doing? The police is going to Massachusetts to go figure out where in the world is Charles Jr. And guess what? He wasn't there. He was not there. Get this, on March 12th, 1932, the body of the kidnapped toddler was accidentally found, and it was accidentally found by a truck driver and his assistant. All right, and it was 45 feet from the highway near Mount Rose, New Jersey, and the discovery was made by William Allen, who was an assistant to a truck driver named Arville Wilson. All right, and the head was crushed. The head was crushed, guys. That makes me really upset, because we're talking about a full-blown baby. The head was crushed, and there was a hole in the skull, and some of the body members were missing. So then the body was identified, and of course it ended up being none other than Charles Jr. And the examiner showed that the child had been dead for about 2 months, and the death was caused by a blow to the head. Now, it is speculated, it is a theory, it's not a fact, that it is possible that Charles Jr. ended up passing away when basically John was going down the ladder, because the ladder was kind of just like messed up. Remember, it was broken. So here comes the investigation. So like I mentioned before, they ended up giving the ransom money to this John male, right? And here is John going over to a gas station, and he ended up giving a $10 golden certificate to the person who pumps the gas for you. And this attendant thought it was really weird, like the money that he received, because he's like, I've never seen anything like this, because back in the day, like, money was money, but it had like a gold thing, like what was that? So lucky for everybody, he ended up writing down the license plate of the person who gave them that money. So ding ding ding, now they got who it was. Okay, but get this. Prior to that, on May 1933, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York actually ended up discovering 296 $10 golden certificates, right? Because this had the same amount of serial numbers that they were trying to find for the Lindbergh ransom. And these bills were included among the currency received by the Federal Reserve Banks on May 1st, 1933. And apparently had been made in one deposit. So all this money was given to the bank, like, hey, I'm depositing this money, it is what it is. So immediately upon discovery of these bills, deposit tickets at the Federal Reserve Bank for May 1st, 1933 were examined. One was found bearing the name and the address of J.J. Faulkner, 537 West 149th Street, and had marked thereon gold certificates, 10s and 20s, in the amount of $2,980. Despite extensive research, the depositor was never located. They could never locate who was the one that deposited this money. So, the examination of the ransom note by handwriting experts resulted in virtually anonymous opinion that all the notes were written by the same person and the writer was of German nationality. Okay? So of course it would make sense that this person didn't know how to write English as well, because that wasn't their first language. But they did know that it's probably somebody that had spent some time in America. So Dr. Kondo ended up describing John as a Scandinavian and believed he could identify the men if he was able to find a photograph, and was like, hey, I'm going to be able to identify them. And of course, Dr. Kondo, and do you remember that first taxi driver from the 5th ransom note that delivered it to Dr. Kondo, Joseph? Joseph and Dr. Kondo had the exact same identification for who the supposed John was. Okay? Who was this supposed John? So basically, the New York City Borough Office engaged with Dr. Kondo and said, hey, I would like you to write down all of the conversations and what kind of conversations you ended up having with the supposed John, right? So of course he did as he was instructed. So basically, you know, because they ended up getting the information of what he sounded like, the bureau had this idea of the nationality, the demeanor of this person, the kind of dialect that they spoke, how they acted, and all that jazz. And of course they save that information for further use, right? Another interesting attempt to identify the kidnapper centered around the ladder used in the crime. Do you remember about that? Okay, the police quickly realized that it was crudely built, all right? But built nonetheless by someone familiar with wood who was mechanically inclined, right? Like, I can't build a ladder. You have to know how to build a ladder. So again, the ladder was part of the evidence, and they try to figure out, like, okay, like, what do I have to do in order to use this as evidence? Of course, they try to get fingerprints there, but no, honey. Silvers of the ladder even had been analyzed, and the types of woods used in the ladder had been identified, right? So they were trying to go across. So perhaps a complete examination of the ladder by itself by a wood expert would yield additional clues, right? So here comes this expert called Arthur Kohler. I'm not sure how to say his name, okay? Arthur, of the Forest Services, United States of Department of Agriculture. And the interesting thing about him is that as soon as he heard about this case, he was like, yo, put me on this case, because I'm really well, like, being able to identify these ladders, because it's kind of like a fingerprint, right? So Arthur disassembled the ladder and painstakingly identified the types of woods that we use and examined the tool marks, right? He looked at the patterns of, like, basically how that person ended up making the ladder, and he, you know, went on the hunt. Like, hey, remember, they went on the hunt to try to find thing. He summarized his findings in a report and later played a critical role. So then they found the kidnapper, right? Hampton is located, okay? So it's for a period of 7 months prior to August 20th, 1934, no golden certificates were discovered except for those received in the Federal Reserve Bank, right? Remember I told you, I was like, oh, hey, like they found it, but they couldn't go, like who deposited this money? So August 20th, 1934, and extended into September, a total of 16 golden certificates were discovered, most of them in the vicinity of Yorkville and Harlem, all right? The long-awaited opportunity had been finally arrived as each bill was recovered. A colored pin marking the location of the recovered bill was inserted in a large map of the area, thus indicating the movement of the so-called John, who had been playing these games, right? Because you did not give us Charles Jr. You just played yourself. But guess what? He played himself. All right? The first few made their appearances, it was decided to concentrate on the golden certificates. So they knew, hey, I know that if I'm gonna catch this so-called John, I'm going to have to pay attention to the golden certificates. Good thinking. Ding, 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 ding. At about 1:20 p.m. on September 18, 1934, the manager of the Corn Exchange Bank and Trust Company in New York City telephoned the New York City Bureau office to advise that a $10 golden certificate had been discovered a few minutes previously on one of the tellers in that bank. It was soon asserted that the bill had been received at the bank from a gasoline station, right? And on September 15th, 1934, an alert attendant had received a bill in payment for 5 gallons of gasoline from a man description fit closely to the individual who passed those buildings several weeks ago. Thank you, right? The license plate was issued to Bruno Richard Hampton, right? And it was in 1279 East 22nd Street, Bronx, New York. Well, guess what, my friend? Remember March 4th, 1932? Like, remember the second ransom note? That's where it was dated. Well, it starts to fall in line, right? So Hampton's house was closely surveilled, all right? They were like, hey, I think this is our dude. We gotta go figure out what in the world is this dude up to. And of course, it fit the description of John as supplied by Dr. Kondo, and he was taken by authorities. You really thought you were gonna be playing these games, right? So, at some investigation, they found that Bruno, Mr. Bruno here, ended up having the exact wood that was used to build this ladder in the attic upstairs. The wood from the attic upstairs. And get this, he had the phone number of Dr. Kondo in his closet. Did you hear that? He had the phone number of Dr. Kondo in his closet. And he had approximately $14,000 of these golden certificates. But it is said that Bruno said, hey, no, one of my friends or this guy just ended up giving me this money. Like, my friend just told me, like, to hold it here, and he ended up running away, and that's why the money's here. But, like, hello, you fit the description. You have the phone number of Dr. Kondo, and Joseph's also saying that you look like him. This is not looking good for you, buddy. All right? And they were looking, like, the police ended up, like, looking around his house, and they found different notes, like writing sample, and the samples that they found in his house, like the way he wrote, were pretty much identical to the ones that they found for the ransom note. So they have writing samples, here they have the ladder sample, here they have evidence of the money. Everything is leading up to him. So of course he ended up getting arrested. It's like, it is supposedly said that he probably didn't act alone, and I've heard speculation and theories as well that it might have been his roommate, because his roommate apparently like fled like after the kidnapping or something. But it could just be like, hey, I'm just saying these things, and really he's guilty. So for further investigation, developed that Hampton, who was 35 years old, was a native to Saxon, Germany. All right, so he fit the description, and he had a criminal record for robbery. that he spent time in prison. Early in July 1932, he stowed away abroad at Bremen, Germany, and arrived at the port of New York on July 1923. He was arrested and deported immediately after another failed attempt at entry in August. So Hampton successfully entered into the United States in November 1932 on board the George Washington. On October 10th, 1925, Hampton married Anna, a New York waitress. His son Manfred was born to them in 1933 during his illegal stay in New York City until the spring of 1932. So, during his illegal stay, Hampton followed his occupation as a carpenter. However, a short while after March 1st, 1932, the date of kidnapping, Hampton began to trade rather extensively in stock and never worked again. So Hampton was indicted in the Supreme Court of Bronx County, New York, on charges of extortion on September 16th, 1934, and on October 8th, 1934 in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. 2 days later, the governor of the state of New York honored the requisition of the governor of New Jersey for the surrender of Bruno. In October 1934, he was removed to Hunterdon County Jail. So basically, the two governors were in communication. The governor of New York was like, hey, you know, the governor of New Jersey really wants me to send him over. I'm going to honor that. I'm going to send him over. And he was pretty much in the county jail of that location in Flemington, New Jersey to await his trial. So the trial of Hampton began on January 3rd, 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey, and lasted for 5 weeks. The case against him was based on the evidence that they found. It's not looking pretty for you. And on February 13, 1935, the jury returned with a verdict. Hampton was guilty of murder in the first degree, and his sentence was death, and the defense appealed. The Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey on October 9th, 1935 upheld the verdict of the lower court. Hampton's appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States was denied on December 9th, 1935, and he would then be electrocuted on January 17th, 1936. However, on the same day, the governor of the state of New Jersey granted a 30-day reprieve, and on February 17th, 1936, Hampton was resentenced to be electrocuted during the week of March 30th, 1936. And on that same day, the pardon court of the state of New Jersey denied Hampton's petition for clemency. And on April 3rd, 1936, at 8:47 p.m., Bruno Richard Hampton was electrocuted. So it's really sad that the story ended up going this way, because an innocent child ended up being kidnapped from their home to just end up dead 4 miles away from his own house where he was kept safe. And it's like so sad. You know, during this time frame, it's not like they have all these advanced technologies that we have now, right? Like, how would you be able to track people, right? Like, it was you know, the fact that they were able to find handwriting samples, the fact that they were able to find the ladder, like that's huge, right? So that is the story of the Lindbergh case. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your beautiful day or night.